While on an adventure camping in Alaska's rugged wilderness, my own kid pulled a nasty move. He ditched me, leaving me without food or gear, casually saying, "Catch you later, hope you meet a bear." He was betting on me starving or becoming grizzly food, all for the sake of my inheritance. But back home, surprise, I was already there, grinning. "Got something wild to tell you," I said, grinning from ear to ear. Suddenly, the front door swung open wide. In came Mason, drenched hoodie, shoes sliding on my floor from the Seattle rain. "Dad, I need $5,000, like, now." I was totally taken aback, pen still in hand while I was sifting through some bills. There was no softness in his voice. This was a full-on demand, not a request. "Mason, what?" I somehow managed. $5,000 tonight." He was pacing back and forth, fists clenched. "I just gave you your monthly allowance last week," I pointed out. Frustrated, he retorted, "$3,000 barely covers my rent. You think that's enough? That it solves all my problems?" My shirt felt tighter, my fingertips still stained from fixing Mrs. Chen's car transmission earlier. I'd built these garages from nothing, pulling grueling 18-hour days after Sarah was gone, sacrificing to give him opportunities I never had. "We've talked about this, son. You need to get yourself a steady job." Mason spun around, his face reddening. "Why bother working when you've got all this money stashed, clinging onto it like some dictator?" His words cut deep, and my instincts straightened my back. "I'm trying to teach you about responsibility." He scoffed. "Responsibility? Seriously? When you're gone, I'll take over your auto shops. I'll run them way better than you ever did." His words stayed like poison. My heart twisted at his talk about my death like it was nothing, the greed flashing in his eyes. This wasn't desperation. This was pure hunger for money. My mouth opened, but no words formed. 2 decades of being a single parent, sacrificing, hoping he'd become someone his mom would be proud of, seemed to vanish in an instant. Mason noticed my shock, realizing he'd exposed too much. Without another word, he bolted towards the door, which slammed shut like a gunfire crack. The family photo on the mantel wobbled, Sarah's cheerful face quivering inside the frame. I stood there, still as stone, watching it slowly settle. Silence was roaring in my ears. Outside, the sound of Mason's car starting up filled the air, fading into nothing. I stayed frozen at my desk, gripping the pen tightly, eyes fixed on the photo quaking in its place. The next morning, I reached for that same family picture. Sarah's radiant smile greeted me, holding 8-year-old Mason at his baseball game. The memory hit hard, Sarah's funeral, Mason in an oversized suit, holding my hand as I fought not to crumble under the pressure. The mortgage was 3 months past due on my first garage. Sarah's medical bills had drained our savings dry. I had promised to look after him, giving him everything his mother couldn't. By Thursday, I was poring over old photo albums. Each page revealed more sacrifices I'd glossed over. Mason's costly private school education, forked out at $40,000 a year since public school wasn't deemed good enough for Sarah's boy. His entire college at the University of Washington, complete with the dorm experience he insisted on. The brand new Honda Civic I bought for graduation, a cool $18,000 in cash because he turned his nose up at used cars. I traced the lines of his 16th birthday photo, seeing even back then there was something missing in his eyes. While other kids took up summer jobs, Mason was gaming away the days, living off allowances I naively thought were investments for his future. The truth was clear now, through decades of snapshots. Each handout, each saving operation, each financial crisis I'd fixed had worn away at his character. I thought I was being a good dad, but instead, I'd unknowingly shaped a stranger who saw my passing as a mere financial opportunity. By Saturday night, I found myself settled in Sarah's favorite chair, the one she really should have seen this coming from a mile away. Sarah always had a gift for figuring people out, way better than I ever could. She would have pushed him to stand on his own, making him earn his keep. I let her down, I mumbled into the empty room. That thought hit me hard, like a bitter blast of winter wind. For 2 decades, I tried to buy Mason's love, thinking it would make up for losing his mom. Throwing money at it was my way of hiding my guilt and failures. I somehow believed that providing for him was the same as caring for him. Sunday morning rolled around, and I returned the photo albums to their place before sitting at my desk. My hands shook a bit as I grabbed a pen and some paper. My military precision helped calm my breathing. I needed to think sharp, plan for situations I hoped I'd never need to face. The blank page seemed to mock me, daring me to make decisions I wasn't ready for. One ring, another one. My pen floated above the legal papers I was dealing with when the phone shattered the calm. Mason's name appeared on the screen. I paused, then picked up. "Hey there, son. Dad? Hi. How's everything?" His voice was overly chipper, like someone trying to sell something. It felt too upbeat, too eager. "I'm doing all right. This is kind of surprising after our talk last week." "Yeah, about that. I've been doing some thinking. I was way out of line, and I really want to fix things." His words spilled out too fast, too rehearsed. "Actually, I've got an idea. Something that could make things right between us." I kept quiet, using silence as a lesson from my military days. "How about we go camping in Alaska, Denali National Park, just the two of us, like when I was a kid. Remember?" It threw me off. Mason hadn't shown any interest in outdoor stuff since high school. "This is pretty sudden." I know, but here's the thing. My friends backed out last minute, and I've got these tickets that'll just go to waste. Everything's set. Flights, camping gear, park permits. It'll all be for nothing if we don't take off by tomorrow." I tightened my grip on the phone. The sudden rush felt like it was meant to keep me from thinking it through. "Mason, since when do you plan camping trips? Come on, Dad. Remember teaching me how to read animal tracks and start a fire with wet wood? You always said the wilderness shows who we really are." That nod to our past stirred something in me. Those were good times, before Sarah's death turned our lives upside down, before I started to think money could fix everything. "This could be our chance to reconnect," Mason continued, his tone more genuine. "To remember what we had, without any distractions, away from city life, just father and son in the wild." I closed my eyes, caught between hope and skepticism. Every rational part of me sounded alarms. The timing, the sudden enthusiasm, the story about his friends bailing. It all felt too plotted. Yet underneath my doubts there was a deeper hurt. What if he was being genuine? What if he really wanted to repair our relationship? "The flights are on March 25th, Mason pushed. "Seattle to Anchorage. Then we'll drive to the park. 5 days in the wilderness, just like old times." 5 days, I repeated, mulling it over. "Dad, seriously, these tickets will go to waste, and it might be our last chance to fix what's broken between us." Silence lingered. I looked at the papers on my desk. Important documents that could change everything, precautions against events I hoped would never happen. "Okay," I found myself saying. "Let's do it." "Really? That's awesome. I'll send you the flight details. Meet me at SeaTac's departure gate. This is going to be great, Dad. You'll see." The call ended. Slowly, I put the phone down, my hand trembling slightly. Outside, Seattle's familiar drizzle created patterns on the window. My eyes moved from the documents on my desk to the pen in my grasp. Hope and skepticism. Both felt like a kind of betrayal. 3 days later, I carefully folded the documents and tucked them into the inner pocket of my travel bag. They felt heavier than they should, burdened with possible outcomes I never wanted to deal with. Mason stood at gate C12, bouncing around like an excited kid. His backpack looked brand new. When he spotted me approaching, his grin stretched wide. "Hey, Dad, perfect timing. They just announced boarding." He seemed pretty thrilled. I scanned his face and noticed a minor twitch in his left eye. My military experience had taught me to distinguish between genuine excitement and just playing it cool. Why wouldn't I be? It's a father-son adventure into the unknown. He grabbed his backpack with a bit of effort. When was the last time we did something like this together? During our initial flight, he was ecstatic, constantly talking about taking wild photos and enjoying fresh air. However, he checked his phone more often than someone wanting to unplug. I shared tales from my Navy survival training, showing him how to read the weather, find edible plants, and get around without a GPS. "You actually know all this stuff?" Mason asked, jotting down notes on a napkin. 20 years in the service gets you ready for anything." His expression was a mix of admiration and calculation. Our stopover in Seattle lasted longer than expected. Mason disappeared 3 times, claiming bathroom breaks, each lasting 20 minutes. From the terminal, I watched planes against a gray backdrop, with Alaska creeping closer as hours ticked by. The last leg of our trip had us flying over rugged mountain ranges peeking through the sky. Mason pressed his face to the window but looked more anxious than awestruck. When we landed in Anchorage, the crisp air and smell of snow greeted us. The car rental process was a breeze, a Toyota 4Runner with extra insurance and snow chains. I took care of the paperwork while Mason packed our gear, clearly favoring his right shoulder. "Next stop, the outdoor supply store," he announced, checking his phone yet again. "Need to grab a few more supplies." At Northern Exposure Outfitters, he was extremely picky about what he bought: high-powered flashlights, emergency flares, rope, far more than what's usually needed for a camping trip. The clerk, a guy with frostbitten cheeks, raised an eyebrow at our selection. "Planning to get lost out there?" he asked. "Just taking precautions," Mason replied swiftly. Highway 3 stretched ahead like a silver ribbon through endless forests, with mountains flanking us, their snowy peaks reflecting the last bits of sunlight. Road signs warned about moose crossings and icy roads. "Stunning country," I remarked, attempting to ease the silence. "Yeah, really secluded," Mason responded with odd satisfaction. We were miles from anything. As night fell, we stopped for gas. While I refueled, Mason wandered into the convenience store. Through its brightly lit windows, I saw him pull out his phone, make a call, his posture hunched, speaking low and urgently. When he came back, I casually asked, "All okay? I noticed you on a call." "Just checking tomorrow's weather," he said, avoiding eye contact. "A storm's coming in, but it should pass by morning." The lie was too smooth. I'd checked the forecast already. Clear skies for the next 3 days. As we got back on the highway, old military instincts kicked in. The gut feeling that kept me alive in tight spots. Something felt off, but I couldn't pinpoint it. 40 miles later, that call at the gas station still bugged me. "So, what did the weather say for real?" I asked. Mason gripped the door tighter. "Possibly a few snow flurries? Not a big deal." His evasiveness confirmed my suspicions, but I maintained a neutral tone. "Good thing we packed plenty of layers." We reached Denali's entrance soon after, with wooden signs marking the park boundary and cabins scattered among tall spruce trees. Even in this season, the visitor center buzzed with activity. Most tourists came in summer, but March visitors were serious adventurers or locals. The Denali Lodge Motel looked just like the photos Mason showed me: rustic log buildings, rooms labeled Grizzly Den and Caribou Creek. The desk clerk, a young woman with chapped hands, managed our check-in while Mason examined trail maps on the wall. "First visit to Denali?" she inquired. "For him," I said, nodding at Mason. "I've been to Alaska before on military drills." "Which trails are you planning to explore?" Before I could say anything, Mason jumped in. "We're taking the backcountry route along the Tlanica River. We want the real wilderness experience." The clerk went from looking friendly to concerned. "That's pretty intense terrain. Most people prefer the shorter, easier trails." Mason, full of confidence, said, "We know what we're doing," even though it had been a decade since he last went camping. Park Ranger Jennifer Walsh had a no-nonsense vibe, like she could handle whatever the wilderness threw her way. Her office smelled like coffee and pine, with maps and wildlife pictures covering the walls. "Gentlemen," she said, "let's talk seriously about this trip." She spread a map on the table. "The Tlanica River route? It's 30 miles from the nearest ranger station. You'll have no cell service and will be alone out there at this time of year." Her finger traced red spots on the map. "There's been a lot of grizzly activity here, and here. We saw some cubs last week, which means their mother isn't far. We've also had wolf pack sightings, and moose can be pretty unpredictable come spring." Mason leaned in, soaking up all the details. "What about emergency evacuation?" "Helicopter rescues," she noted. "Could take days if the weather's bad." Ranger Walsh appeared as if she knew exactly how tourists underestimated the wilderness and landed themselves in trouble. "So, how experienced are you guys in the wilderness?" she inquired. I straightforwardly talked about my military background, while Mason offered vague camping anecdotes from his adventures with friends. Her doubts were evident. "Honestly, this isn't a beginner's trip. We offer incredible guided tours and shorter paths." Mason interrupted her. "We'll be just fine. My dad's practically a survival pro." After filling out liability forms and watching bear safety videos, we rented bear-proof food containers and emergency beacons. I insisted on renting a familiar Remington 870 defensive rifle. "Really think you'll need that?" Mason asked, sounding uneasy. "In Alaska, you just don't go into bear territory without protection." Our final stop was setting up the GPS on our emergency beacon. Ranger Walsh demonstrated the activation process with precision. "Hold this for 5 seconds, and it will signal for help. Just remember, even with coordinates, it could take at least 12 to 18 hours to reach you." Loading our gear into the truck, I felt the usual pre-mission jitters. Everything screamed caution: the isolation, Mason's clear lack of skill, and his odd obsession with solitude. "Still up for this route?" I asked as we drove away from the station. Mason tried a smile. "Totally. No turning back now, huh, Dad?" It sounded less like enthusiasm and more like a hint of inevitability. Watching the ranger station vanish in the mirror, it seemed more like we were saying goodbye to civilization, entering what felt like a trap instead of an adventure. The forest road narrowed, branches clawing at our windows like skeletal fingers. Our GPS guided us deeper into unmapped territory, past the last cell towers, beyond any marked paths, into a wild known for swallowing the unready whole. "We're completely off the grid," I remarked as my phone lost its last signal bar. Mason let out a half-hearted laugh. "Just us in the wild now." At mile 23, the Tlanica signaled the end of the trail. I parked near some old wooden posts that looked like grave markers in the dim light. Unpacking, our differences were obvious. My pack was evenly balanced thanks to military training, while Mason's was haphazard, crammed with gear he'd never tried before. "This thing's way too heavy," he complained, struggling with it. "Good packing's an art," I replied, helping him adjust the load. He winced when I touched his shoulder. "Got an injury?" "Just an old one, no big deal." The trail wove through dense spruce trees, with sunlight just trickling down. Moss-covered logs became hurdles to climb, and tiny streams required careful stone hopping to cross. As soon as we hit the trail, nature signs were everywhere. Huge moose tracks stamped into the mud, eagles screaming overhead, and far-off howls hinting at nearby wolves. "Did you hear that?" Mason halted suddenly, looking a bit pale. The wolves were maybe 5 miles away. I kept moving forward, noticing that his expression had more to do with fear than wildlife wonder. For someone who begged to take this remote trail, he sure seemed uneasy about what it brought. After hiking 3 hours, we stumbled on an ideal camping spot by a Russian creek, flat land, fresh water, and clear sight lines in every direction. My military-trained instincts kicked in as I mentally marked defense points and escape paths, while Mason collapsed onto a fallen log. "How much more do we have to hike?" he gasped. This spot works for tonight. We'll venture further tomorrow, I replied. Setting up camp made it obvious Mason was a rookie. I went through my usual routine, hung our food 12 feet up, set the cooking area downwind from our sleeping spot, and kept emergency gear within arm's reach. Meanwhile, Mason was struggling just to erect his tent. Dad, can you give me a hand? He said, waving his tangled tent lines in surrender. Showing him the ropes felt like old times when he actually wanted to learn stuff. But I couldn't shake the nagging feeling. Why insist on a wilderness trip if you can't even handle the basics? As the fire cast dancing shadows, I whipped up dinner while Mason sat unusually mute, staring into the flames with an expression I couldn't pin down. The temperature continued to drop. Alaskan March nights weren't a joke. Remember those camping trips we used to take? I tried to get a chat going, hoping to spark some nostalgia. You were about 10, roasting marshmallows non-stop until they caught fire. Your mom was still with us back then, I mentioned. His reply carried an unexpected sorrow. She was big on camping trips, said they revealed people's best sides. Mason nodded, but his eyes seemed far off. Tell me about your early days, Dad. Before the military, before the business. How was it growing up poor? The question surprised me. He rarely showed interest in my past. So I shared stories I hadn't revisited in a long time, like my childhood in rural Montana, working summers on farms, barely scraping by. Sounds tough, he noted, but there was a calculated tone, not sympathy. Hard work taught me character. It taught me the value of earning what you get. Something shifted in his expression, resentment or frustration, yet his tone remained smooth. Guess I'm lucky, right? I missed out on all that character building, he quipped with a hint of sarcasm. The talk continued alongside the fire, Mason pushing me to recall military days, survival training, those lifesaver skills. I found myself opening up more freely than usual, drawn by what seemed genuine interest. How do you spot a liar? He suddenly asked. Body language changes, voice fluctuations, inconsistent stories. I tended the fire, sending embers into the sky. Just wondering. You've always been sharp at reading people, he observed. When I put out the fire for the night, peace settled over the camp. Stars came out, forming constellations I hadn't glimpsed since my service days, untouched by city lights. The wilderness felt pure, untouched, nearly sacred. I'll take the first watch, Mason offered. I'm not tired. You sure? I asked. We've got a big day ahead. Yeah, I want to soak this in. Listen to the forest, he said. I crawled into my tent, trusting him to alert me when it was my shift. Through the tent walls, I heard him shuffling near the fire, adding wood and getting comfortable. The usual campsite sounds should have been calming, but as sleep loomed, his sudden eagerness kept me on edge. Mason wasn't one to seek solitude in nature. Why start now? Just before I dozed off, the change outside caught my attention. Absence of fire noises, an eerie quiet that suggested waiting instead of watching. Sunlight streaming into my tent nudged me awake. Outside, I heard the hurried bustle of gear being packed up, way too early and frantic for a run-of-the-mill morning. With the tent set up, I stepped into the icy morning air, where you could see every breath hanging like a small cloud. Over at the truck, Mason was packing with a focus I'd never seen in him before. Gear, GPS, an emergency beacon, his rifle, food, all of it was disappearing into the truck. What's happening? I asked, breaking the silence. Mason flinched, then stood as if bracing himself for a confrontation. Getting ready to leave, he said, his voice flat. But we've got 3 days left here, I reminded him. Why the hurry? Did something change? He continued to pack, avoiding my gaze. Weather's shifting, he mumbled, but I didn't buy it. Yesterday's forecast had been clear, and the sky didn't look any different. My military instincts, dormant since I got to Alaska, started alerting me. Mason, tell me what's really going on, I pushed. His face changed, and suddenly, years of bottled-up anger burst out like a dam giving way. "You really want to know? I'm sick of it all," he spat. "Sick of your control, the manipulation, the constant judgment." "I don't understand," I started, but he cut me off. "Don't call me son. Sons don't get treated like employees or have to beg for money while their dad's sitting on a gold mine," he retorted, bitterness dripping from his words. This wasn't a sudden outburst. This was old resentment, festering for years. "I've given you everything," I argued. "No, you've made me dependent on you, kept me weak, called the shots with your money," he shot back, his voice breaking with anger. "Now, I'm taking control." The realization hit me like a punch. The whole camping trip, it had been a setup. "Finally catching on, military genius?" he taunted. "Took you long enough." "Mason, if you needed money, we could have worked it out," I said. He dismissed it. "I don't want your handouts, Dad. I want what's due to me, your business, your assets, all the power you dangle over me," he said. His words cut deep, chilling the morning air even more. "So you're leaving me here," I said, looking at the stranger who wore my son's face. "Yeah, leaving you to handle things on your own. Maybe 30 miles of wilderness will teach you what real dependence feels like," he replied. My heart sank. "Mason, this is bear country. You can't just leave me without gear or GPS," I pleaded. "You should have thought of that before pulling my strings," he said, slamming the tailgate shut. "Maybe you'll survive, maybe not. But either way, I'll get what I deserve." "I'm sorry," I pleaded, desperation thick in my voice. "Whatever I did wrong, we can fix it." He hesitated for a moment. Was it doubt or a flicker of past affection? But then his face hardened, and any trace of my son disappeared. "Goodbye, Dad," he said, getting into the truck. "Try to avoid grizzlies for a while. I want you to have some time to think about what you've done." The engine roared to life. I moved toward the truck, hoping to reach him, but he reversed and drove away. Through the windshield I watched, his face expressionless. "Mason!" I yelled into the emptiness as the truck disappeared from view. Soon the hum of the engine was gone, leaving just silence on this dirt road, 30 miles from civilization in Alaska's vast wilderness. Dust from Mason's departure hung in the air, and an intense stillness set in. No human sounds, just the whisper of wind in the trees and the distant call of a hawk. Standing there alone, I struggled to process what had just happened. The son I had raised and loved had left me to fend for myself, maybe even to die. As the dust began to settle, my military training kicked in, taking over the emotional chaos inside me. I couldn't afford to be shocked or frozen, not here, where surviving was anything but guaranteed, 30 miles away from anyone and right in grizzly country. I focused on steadying my breathing, allowing my Navy instincts to take charge. First rule in survival: assess your resources. I checked my pockets, wallet, house keys, and a small folding knife I'd forgotten about. No food, no water, no anything else. So there I was, just me, my GPS, and my regular clothes, without an emergency beacon. First on the agenda, figure out my surroundings. It was March in Alaska, so nights got freezing cold. Tall spruce trees all around, no trails, and no one else around. Ranger Walsh's cautionary advice echoed in my mind: beware of grizzly bears, wolves, and tricky weather. Next on the list, basic survival tactics: find shelter, secure water, set signals, and figure out which way to go. I used the sun to guide me. Going east would lead me deeper into the wild. West would eventually meet the main park road, but I had no clue how far. I vaguely remembered seeing a map back at the ranger station. Rivers typically flowed northwest towards the park's boundaries. I had to get moving. Staying put was not an option. So I headed west, following the faint tire tracks Mason had left behind. Not long after, the tracks branched off onto what seemed like an animal trail cutting through the undergrowth. Animals usually meant water nearby, which was vital for surviving and getting rescued. Every step was tough. At 58, my knees were definitely feeling the uneven ground, and I was nowhere near as fit as I'd been during my military years. My anger fueled me onwards, angry at Mason's deceit, at my own blindness, and for allowing him to become this unrecognizable person. The forest surrounded me like a living tunnel, with the towering spruce trees, keeping the sunlight from hitting the forest floor, casting shadows even at midday. I kept breaking branches as I walked, hoping it might help rescuers spot me, although I knew it was a long shot. Bear signs were everywhere, scratch marks on trees, big paw prints, and fresh droppings. I recalled Ranger Walsh advising to make noise to avoid running into bears by surprise. It was ironic that being abandoned by my son meant bears might not be my biggest problem. Time crawled by. First, my mouth went dry, then completely parched. The trail wound through thicker vegetation, and I lost it a few times, forcing me to backtrack and find it again. My legs were leaden with fatigue, but resting would cost valuable daylight. Then, out of nowhere, a sound caught my attention. Mechanical, rhythmic, definitely engines. I stopped and listened closely. It was coming from the north, about half a mile away. If it was ATVs or motorcycles, that meant people. Hope sprang in my chest, despite Mason's betrayal. I turned towards the engine noises, pushing past branches that snagged on my clothes. The sounds grew nearer, definitely all-terrain vehicles moving carefully. The forest cleared, and through the trees, I saw an open space. The engines were now really close, about 200 yards away. I sped up, urgency over caution, branches whipping at my face as I hurried towards what might be my salvation. I burst into a clearing, and there, 4 ATV riders were taking a break. They looked stunned as I stumbled out of the forest, scratched up and clearly out of place in such a remote setting. The lead rider, a rugged man in his 40s with the look of someone at home in the wilderness, cut the engine and walked over, genuinely concerned. "Sir, what happened? Why are you alone out here?" I tried to talk, but my throat was rough from thirst and anxiety. "My son left me out here, took everything, and drove off." His expression shifted from concern to disbelief. "Left you here? That's practically attempted murder." "I'm William Harper. My son Mason. We came camping, and then—" I tried my best to explain without delving into the mess of family issues. "He just drove off with the truck and all our stuff. Abandoned me to die here." "Wow." The man removed his helmet, revealing sharp, observant eyes that took in my condition and story. "I'm Oliver Reed, used to be a park ranger around these parts. These are my friends. We're doing a backcountry tour." The group of riders surrounded me, visibly shocked by the idea of being intentionally abandoned in the wild. One woman, around my age, handed me a bottle of water, which I drank gratefully. "When did this go down?" Oliver asked, his voice suddenly serious and urgent. "This morning, probably 4 hours ago," I answered. Oliver turned to his team. "We've got to get you out of here right away. Our radio isn't too strong, but we can reach the ranger station once we get to higher ground. And—" he paused, staring at his GPS. "If your son took the main highway, it's easily a 6-hour drive to Anchorage. But there's a shortcut, I know." He talked about an old ranger trail cutting through tough terrain. "We could have you back at the park entrance in about 90 minutes. The thought hit me hard. "Could I get there first?" I asked. "Easily," Oliver said. "Do you want to call the police right away, or do you have another idea?" Something clicked inside me, replacing the fear I'd been feeling all day. Mason thought he had me beat, lost, and stranded, but he didn't count on the kind of help I'd find out here or my own survival instincts. "I want to head back to my motel first," I said carefully, before deciding about the police. Oliver nodded, understanding and reassuring me. "Just hang on behind me. We'll take the ranger trail. Your son won't even know we passed." We zipped through hidden forest trails, revealing a side of Denali I hadn't seen before. secret paths for emergencies, known only to rangers and serious outdoor guides. "I've been a ranger here for 15 years, Oliver shouted over the engine. "Seen lots of foolishness, but this? Leaving someone behind like that? It's criminal." The scenery whizzed by. Stream crossings, steep hills, spots where we had to hop off and maneuver the ATVs around fallen logs. Despite the tough trail, we made great time, reaching the paved road much faster than Oliver expected. The Denali Lodge Motel came into view, its cozy cabin looked welcoming after my brush with the wild. As we pulled into the lot, our rental truck was still nowhere in sight. "Looks like your son hasn't made it back yet," Oliver observed. "You've got some time to sort out your plan." We exchanged contacts and the offer to be witnesses if this ended up in court. Oliver handed me his card with his phone number and email. "Reach out when you're ready to involve the law. What your son tried needs to be addressed." As they packed up to leave, Oliver asked, "Do you mind sharing what you're planning to do when he shows up?" I looked at our room and the documents in my jacket. Mason spent years trying to bring me down. Now, my turn had come. "I'm going to give him what he thinks he wanted," I replied, "just not how he imagined." Once back in the room, I settled on the bed, keeping my phone close. Oliver's card was within arm's reach, along with his offer to call the authorities. But first, I needed to see the situation clearly. The legal documents I drew up in Seattle felt powerful now, like a hidden weapon. A while back, I changed my will, fueled by disillusionment. Now it seemed perfectly timed for this fight. I spread the papers on the desk, reviewing the words with the lawyer's help. Mason would get nothing. Instead, my assets were set aside for wildlife conservation, veteran charities, and a scholarship in Sarah's honor. The irony was sharp. His plot to kill for inheritance would leave him with zilch. But just words wouldn't cut it. I needed proof, witnesses, and consequences chasing Mason forever. I called Oliver. He answered right away. "William, you settled in?" "Yes," I said. "I need your help. When Mason gets back, I need everything documented. His reaction, his words, the whole shebang. Are you planning on confronting him before calling the cops? I'm thinking of letting him believe he's about to get what he's always wanted, the chance to run my business, right until he realizes what he's truly done to himself." The call went silent for a while. Then Oliver broke in. "All right, sounds good. Should I come as a witness?" "Yeah, if you're up for it. Maybe bring that digital camera you had on the trail. Mason's going to say things the jury needs to see." "What time do you think he'll arrive?" I ran through Mason's route in my head, taking Main Park Road to Anchorage Highway, probably stopping for gas and a snack. He drives slowly on unfamiliar roads, so maybe between 9 and 10 tonight when he's tired, a bit too sure of himself, expecting to find an empty room and a dad who didn't make it. But instead, he'll walk into his target waiting for him, ready to go. After Oliver agreed to be there by 8:30, I called my lawyer in Seattle. It was a short but crucial call. Tomorrow morning, the new will gets filed, regardless of what goes down tonight. Mason's share vanishes as soon as the papers hit the courthouse. Then I called the motel office to book a room next to mine for Oliver. The old lady at the front desk didn't even flinch at the odd request, given the many Alaskan stories she must have heard. The night slipped in with a strange stillness. I cleaned up, put on fresh clothes, and arranged the room meticulously. Legal papers were laid out on the desk for Mason to spot right away. Oliver's camera would have a clear view from the next room. My phone was prepped with 911 on speed dial. My military training taught me that preparedness eliminates surprises. Tonight, Mason would step into a scene totally stacked against him. It felt poetic in a way. My kid had been scheming against me in the wild for months. Now, I was plotting his downfall in civilization, but he'd live to face the consequences. Oliver arrived quietly at 8:15 with his professional photography gear and a look of someone who's seen too much tragedy out there. He got everything set up next door, audio and video covering the entire room. He pointed to the connecting door. Once he's in, you'll have all of it taped. What happens when we hand this to the cops? Attempted murder, first degree. Alaska doesn't take kindly to leaving someone to die in the wild. It's almost a death sentence. With your story, my witness account, and whatever he says tonight, Mason's looking at some heavy time. I nodded as a cold satisfaction settled in. Now all that's left is to wait. The night wrapped the motel in a tightening grip. Watching the main road through the window, I waited for Mason's headlights to bring him to his unplanned showdown. It was 8:47 p.m. Any second now, my son would discover his carefully plotted crime had turned into his biggest trap. Headlights drifted across the lot, and I knew the sound of our rental truck engine. Mason returned from his failed plot, probably rehearsing tearful calls about his father's tragic disappearance. I settled into the chair facing the door, with those legal papers prominently on display. I could hear Oliver fine-tuning his gear through the thin wall. Everything was ready. Mason fumbled with the lock before it clicked open. He walked in, tense, expecting an empty room. The light lit up his face as he saw me, like he'd been struck. "Dad," he gasped in a shocked, disbelieving voice. "Hey there, son. How was the trip?" His face changed from confusion to shock, and he looked almost scared. How are you even here?" "Managed to survive? I'm tougher than you thought." Mason's legs seemed shaky. He clutched the doorframe, his eyes searching the room for a way out. "Escape plans?" "I have no idea what you're talking about. I ditched you out there 30 miles from nowhere, without anything. No food, water, nothing." "Yep, I remember clearly." I kept my tone conversational, almost friendly. "Interesting last words," I remarked. "Go make friends with the bears." Really sums it up. "Dad, wait. You're not understanding." "Oh, I understand perfectly. You lured me to Alaska to knock me off for my money. Spent months scheming, picked the most isolated place, even rehearsed your shocked son routine for when they'd find my body." Mason just stared, sweat breaking on his brow despite the cool evening. "The flaw in your plan," I said, rising slowly, "is you overlooked the wilderness community. Some people, it turns out, do stick together and help each other out instead of just leaving a loved one behind." "Look, if this is about money," I cut him off. "For you, it's always been about cash." That's when it hit me. Every conversation, every hike, every moment I thought was a genuine father-son connection, you were just figuring out my value. I went to the desk and grabbed the legal documents. Want to hear something ironic? About 3 weeks ago, right after we argued, I changed my will. Called it paternal disappointment back then. Mason's eyes were locked on the papers I was holding. "What do you mean changed?" "I mean, you get nothing. No auto shops, no bank accounts, not even the house your mom loved. Everything is going to charity, wildlife, veterans, scholarships." He turned pale. "You can't do that. I'm your son. You were my son. But today, you turned into something else. A man who planned to get rid of his father for money." "Dad, come on. Just let me explain." "I was listening this morning when you accused me of ruining your life with my control. I heard you say I'd be better off dead out in bear country. I'm done listening." Mason broke down. "You pompous idiot. You caused all this. Your endless control, your manipulation, keeping me dependent and judging every move I made." There it is, the real Mason Harper. "You want to take me down? Fine. But remember, you had a hand in shaping me. Every dollar you offered, every string you attached, every move you made to control my life. This is on you." A strange calm washed over me. "You're absolutely right. I did bring this on myself. I made you reliant, bought your love, thought providing was the same as being a dad. That's my failure. Then change the will. Fix this. That will was already filed this afternoon. It's irreversible." As I turned to leave the room, I passed my son, who looked smaller, like he had shrunk somehow. "But you got one thing wrong. I didn't create your willingness to kill. That choice was all yours. Mason's voice shook. Where are you going? To report this. Attempted murder is still a crime, even if it didn't pan out. Dad, hold on. I paused at the door. Goodbye, Mason. In a weird way, you've given me what I needed. A clear view of who you really are. The last thing I saw before walking out was my son sinking into the chair I'd vacated, staring at the will that marked the collapse of everything he hoped for with my death. The fluorescent lights of the Anchorage Police Department's interview room buzzed above as Detective Sarah Martinez examined the evidence spread out on the metal table. Oliver's digital recordings, my statement, and Mason's recorded confession from the motel. It all painted a bleak picture of guilt. Mr. Harper, she started. I've been handling wilderness crimes for 8 years, and this is the most premeditated one yet. Detective Martinez clicked through the recordings on her laptop. Your son's words really dig his own grave. When he wanted something, he always went all the way, I replied. The district attorney will be filing charges this morning. First-degree attempted murder, reckless endangerment, and conspiracy to commit fraud regarding your estate. Alaska doesn't take wilderness abandonment lightly. Through the glass of the interview room, I could see Mason being led away in cuffs. A night in holding had erased his bravado. The mask was off. No charm, no tricks, just a 28-year-old facing the consequences of his cold-hearted plans. Oliver stood next to me, having driven all the way from Denali to add his piece to the story. What sort of time was he looking at? Somewhere between 15 to 25 years, contingent on plea deals. In Alaska, if you leave someone to fend for themselves in the wild, it's treated as attempted murder because that's what it essentially is. Watching my son through the glass, I was surprised by how empty the feeling was. This wasn't a victory. It was merely the end of a road he chose long ago, built from arrogance and resentment. Heading back to Seattle today? Detective Martinez asked. Tomorrow, I said. I need to meet with my lawyer first and sort out some estate matters. The detective nodded knowingly. Taking care of your new will and all that. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and gathered the files. I'm setting up a foundation in my late wife's name. I figure Mason's money should benefit people who really need it. Oliver and I stepped outside into the crisp, cool morning air of Anchorage. The downtown traffic moved in that typical Alaskan way, slow but with purpose. What's next? Oliver asked. Return to Seattle. Decide who I want to be with the time I have left. I looked up at the Chugach Mountains towering beyond the city skyline. Surviving my child's attempt on my life has given me a new perspective on what's important. Are you planning to see him during the trial? The question caught me off guard. I thought about it seriously. The urge to stay connected as a father conflicted with the harsh reality of what Mason had tried to do. No, the son I raised died somewhere in those woods the other day. What's left isn't him anymore. We reached Oliver's truck in the parking lot. He handed me a card with his contact information. If you ever want to come back to Alaska for the right reasons, camping, fishing, enjoying the outdoors, give me a call. The first trip's on me. Why would you do that? I asked. Because you went through something that should have ended you, and instead of letting it make you bitter, you're using it to help others. That deserves support. I shook his hand, genuinely grateful for this unexpected friendship. Thanks for everything. Thank the wilderness community. Up here, we look out for each other. As Oliver drove away, I pulled out my phone to call my lawyer in Seattle. There were foundations to establish, scholarships to fund, and a lifetime of enabling to correct through action. Mason tried to end me in Alaska for money. Instead, I found a renewed sense of purpose. His attempt to destroy me taught me the difference between providing for someone and truly caring for them. The irony was perfect. 3 days later in Seattle, a letter from Mason arrived. 5 pages of manipulation disguised as an apology, promising change if I'd reconsider the inheritance, saying prison would ruin his life. I read it once, then ran it through my office shredder. Some bonds just don't survive an attempt on your life, no matter how much money you've invested in them.